what I'm going to do right now is invite my first panel session participants to come up onto the stage. We've got a keynote opening presentation followed by a panel discussion. This first panel is going to be sort of big picture, a discussion of just how we need to get the different elements of this discussion together in terms of the farmers, the producers themselves, the private sector investors, the stakeholders sort of at the sharp end of food consumption, that is you, me, and everybody who eats food, how we bring all of the different elements of this discussion together, how we also incorporate a global picture. The geopolitics of the world is actually making cooperation and collaboration on a transition to more sustainable food systems very difficult right now. We don't even have to talk in detail about what's happening in the world, but it is very obvious global cooperation is not easy at this particular time. So there's lots of big picture stuff I want to get through in the next 45 minutes or so. So without further ado, I'm going to invite you all just to sort of restrain yourselves from applause for the individuals till I've got everybody on the stage up here, and then give them an overwhelming round of applause as a collective group. So could I have now our speakers, starting with Saswati Bora, who is the Global Director of Regenerative Food Systems at the Nature Conservancy. Saswati, if you please come up onto the stage, take a seat for a moment, and then you're going to give us your keynote presentation. Please also welcome Maximo Torero, who is the Chief Economist at the Food and Agriculture Organization at the UN, Nicola Pochettino, who's Director of the Environment and Natural Resources Department at the European Investment Bank, and Leanne Jackson, who's the head of the Agri-Food Trade and Markets Division of the OECD. So, ladies and gentlemen, when everybody is in position, please give them a very, very warm round of applause and a welcome. Thank you, panel. Thank you all very much for joining me. And as I promised, Saswati, if you would take to the lectern, give us your opening remarks, and then we'll get the panel discussion going.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to be here today at this opening session of the Forum for the Future of Agriculture. And before I start, I would like to thank Dr. Potočnik for his inspiring and very thought-provoking remarks, and also for his leadership on this issue. Allow me to jump a few months back from here to last December in Dubai, where I think most of you were there. For the first time, food was finally put on the table when we saw the UN COP28 Climate Summit delivering a landmark declaration on food systems transformation that has been now signed by more than 150 countries. We know that the global food system is a major driver of climate change and biodiversity loss, and we know that climate change is also making it increasingly harder to produce food. Yet it took 27 COPs to put food systems on the global climate agenda. And this declaration is a strong signal that if we want to tackle climate change and nature loss, boost food security and livelihoods, we must transform our food systems. The COP28 declaration follows other recent global commitments, including the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework that was launched a year before to enhance sustainability in agriculture and to enable sustainable consumption and cut food waste. Now, delivering on all of these global commitments will require an all-hands-on-deck approach. And at the Nature Conservancy, our regenerative food system is a key conservation priority where we want to see three key outcomes. First, nature-positive productivity growth. We know that population will increase, and we need to increase productivity growth so that it helps curtail the expansion of food systems into critical natural habitats. The second is greater resilience to climate change, resilience to food price shocks, benefiting people and communities. And last is our focus on regeneration of our natural capital, healthy and functional soils, freshwater, biodiversity, and climate mitigation, to name a few. Now, for too long, the goals of improvement in farmer income and productivity growth and the goals of improvement in nature conservation has been viewed as at odds and pure trade-offs when it did not be so. Within this debate, we have been poorly informed by our understanding on how natural capital, such as soil, water, biodiversity, is related to long-term productivity growth. Take the example of soil health, one of our most important natural capital. Over the past generation or so, we have rediscovered how to keep soils healthy and functional, and how to rehabilitate soils that have been degraded significantly. Okay, brief interruption. A simple set of soil health management principles can keep soils healthy and highly functioning, optimizing productivity growth, even when faced with stresses such as drought, excessive heat, or rain. This is a big deal for food security, but it is also a big deal for our conservation mission. And this is more and more supported by scientific research. An important study that was done in the US looked at soil health management practices practiced by farmers in 9 states. And they found that almost all of them, of course, found there was environmental benefits, but almost 67% of them reported increase in higher yields than conventional systems. Net income increased for 85% of farmers, and almost 97% of them reported increasing resilience to extreme climate events. Now, this is one study, and there's enough other studies out there, and of course, a lot depends on farms and local context and biophysical attributes. But we are in the midst of the early days of a major movement that can best be described as moving from conventional productive systems that are extractive and degrading of nature to regenerative food systems whereby the methods used to manage production rebuilds and restores the natural resource base. And if this movement can continue to be supported and grow rapidly in the next generation, we have a very good chance to avoid the further irreversible damage to our nature and climate. So farmers, upon whom all of us depend and who are on the front lines of climate and biodiversity crisis, are central to these solutions. If our food systems has to move in the right direction at the pace and scale that we want, it's because farmers will make it happen. But they cannot do this alone. Regenerative transitions take time before these benefits can accrue to producers, and farmers face challenges. It's economic barriers, technical barriers, including social challenges. And to support adoption and sustain implementations, farmers need investments. They need financing to support this transition. We need to create the right incentives for farmers through the payment for ecosystem services. The role of private sector will be key. For example, farmers will prioritize regenerative practices if the existing downstream businesses create enough positive incentives for farmers to do so. And we saw that in the last Green Revolution, investment in research and technology was transformational. And now Europe can play a leading role by driving investments in new emission-efficient technologies that improves productivity, creates jobs, and helps us manage 21st century challenges. For example, technology solutions such as sensors and precision agriculture, as we heard today, can improve productivity growth. Technologies such as blockchain and other can improve traceability in supply chain and lead to more financial inclusion for farmers. I like to quote this study that was done by the World Bank and IFPRI a few years back. And it showed that if we were to repurpose a portion of the government's spending on agriculture to develop and disseminate emission-efficient technologies, not only will we see productivity growth, but we will see a reduction in emissions from agriculture by 40%, releasing more than 100 million of hectares of agricultural land to restoration to natural habitats. So that brings me to the actions of governments, from the local to the national to the regional. Governments are the most powerful drivers in the food and agriculture space. By realigning incentives and by repurposing subsidies and regulatory environments, governments can change the economics that drives farmers, that drives businesses, and that drives investors. However, from what we see in the EU, the majority of direct income support from the Common Agriculture Policy is going to a minority of beneficiaries. There's a recent analysis, it says 80% of direct income support is going to 20% of farmers. And while there have been attempts to make the distribution fairer, the fact remains that very little of these payments is currently aligned to support measures that will help farmers to continue to provide food security for Europe in the face of threats and risks related to climate change and biodiversity loss. Strong political will, bold policy shifts are needed, including through repurposing subsidies and incentives to unlock financial flows for a just transition to a regenerative food system that works for people and nature. So I look at the policymakers and businesses here today whose actions are fundamental in shaping how our food systems will look like tomorrow to enabling a just rural transition. The discussions around food and agriculture have become increasingly tense over the past few years, while delayed action will only make the transition harder, especially for the most vulnerable. As broken down as some of these dialogues have become, we do need to continue to talk to one another, to foster understanding, to build partnerships, to enact change. And it doesn't end with what gets said on the stage today, although it is important to voice what's needed. What we wish to see stemming from today is a flurry of action, turning into meaningful progress towards our science-based targets on which our lives and livelihoods depend. The Nature Conservancy stands ready to continue to engage across aisles, across sectors, and across borders, trying to change the world through collaborative partnerships. Let this truly be an occasion for us to restore the opportunity for food systems transformation. Thank you.
Thank you, Saswati. Now, you may have seen, ladies and gentlemen, that the overarching title for this discussion is wonderfully, wonderfully basic. Where do we go from here? Well, that's the kind of question I ask myself every morning. And I kind of like it because it's pretty open-ended. So Saswati's given us her sort of opening view. I want to get each of our panelists to do the same. Panelists, I think you've all prepared some opening remarks. Keep them as brief as you can, because I then want to generate a discussion. But let's get each of you to open up on the broad challenge that the world, and indeed, let's face it, Europe is facing right now on how to sort of develop the systems which will enable an effective transition to a more sustainable food production system. Leanne, you are at the OECD, so why don't you kick us off with your opening thoughts?
Great. Well, it's really such a pleasure to be here, and I'm finding all these discussions already resonating with a lot of the thinking that we're doing at the OECD. So we've heard already from the speakers, two speakers that we've had, that we know that our food systems are facing a triple challenge. It has to produce food, nutritious food for the whole world, needs to make sure that there's livelihoods for everyone who's working within the food system, and, as we've heard, this all has to happen in a sustainable way. And we know that across those objectives, we often talk a lot about trade-offs, but we also believe that there are synergies in terms of the policies that can be put in place to find win-wins. The trick with food systems is they're so diverse, there will be no one solution. So we need to be thinking broadly about how to transition systems, but we can't define one approach. There's no silver bullet that's going to solve this for us. And we're looking, as others have said, we're looking for a paradigm change. And in order for that to happen, we need action. So where OECD sits in this picture is we're an international organization that's about producing data and evidence. And so what we want to do is produce the data and evidence that's going to generate knowledge which can lead to effective action. And just quickly, we see from a food systems perspective, we need to think about how data and evidence is informing consumer choice, because we've also heard that we need to make sure that consumers are part of the solution. We need to make sure that companies understand the impacts of their decisions and therefore can lean in or lean away from certain decisions depending on what they see those impacts to be, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then, of course, we really need our policies to be based on evidence. And around that whole mix, we need to recognize that facts aren't going to solve the problem for us every time, because embedded in food systems are also interests, and we've heard a lot about the farmers, but there's lots of other interests in there, and also values, because food, of course, represents values for everyone. So individuals, businesses, countries come to the debate with a different set of factors that they're considering. So just if I can be quick about the consumers, what we're doing at the OECD is thinking a bit about how within food systems we're measuring environmental impacts. So we want to understand what's actually happening on the ground, and there's lots of innovation within businesses and also at the policy level for how to measure environmental impacts. Lots of diversity, lots of innovation, but then how do you communicate those pieces of information to motivate consumers to change what they're consuming? So that's one aspect. We want to pull in the demand side of the equation in order to get the system moving in the right direction. We also want to think about supply chains, so businesses, and here maybe one example to highlight is this idea of having risk-based due diligence. So OECD has some guidance for companies that's around how to track impacts of their business decisions, both in terms of what's the inputs are coming into their business and what they're producing. And here, OECD focuses on thinking about flexibility, focus, and forward-looking. So if you're thinking about a risk-based due diligence approach, you want to think about flexibility for companies to be able to take action that's proportionate to their circumstances. You also want businesses to be able to focus. They can't do everything everywhere all at once. They need to be able to pick where they can make the most impact. And then forward-looking. So you need to be able to incentivize a progression of decisions that are going to move us on this pathway. And then finally, just thinking about policies and evidence gaps. OECD for a long time has been monitoring agricultural policies, support policies, and what we've seen over time is that there hasn't been a lot of change in terms of the composition of support. So what would benefit the food systems transition is to see more effort going into the types of policies that are around knowledge and innovation, enabling training of farmers, thinking about knowledge systems that allow innovation and innovative approaches rather than policies that are locking in certain behaviors. And then finally, just to wrap up on collaboration, of course, that's why we're here. We need to be talking across the different facts, interests, and values. If we don't have a space where we can listen to each other, we're not going to find a solution that we can take forward. So I'll stop.
Yeah, thanks, Leanne. I'm very mindful the OECD is a sort of classic case of a multilateral international organization built upon the premise that nations are going to cooperate and collaborate to achieve public goods, across the international arena. It's not a good time right now, is it, to be part of an organization like that when we see the rise of different forms of nationalism across continents and across the world. We see a premium on food security. We see international trade becoming less open rather than more open. Do you think the pendulum has swung away from the assumption of sort of international cooperation on one of the, this key challenge, which is to find a way to a more sustainable food production system?
That's the big question, right?
It's a very big question. But essentially, do you just feel momentum is draining away?
I think that attention gets pulled in certain directions. We know that trade has to be part of the solution, and we know that in this sort of current geopolitical context, it's difficult to bring that message forward. So we still need, in order for the world to be moving, because it's not just our corner of the world, we need the whole world moving. We need the global trading system to effectively allow food to move to where it needs to go. And so it is a tension, I would say, and we need to keep thinking holistically about how the system is going to work to achieve this big triple challenge globally.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Leanne. Let's go to Nicola, who is from the European Investment Bank. I'm very mindful, Nicola, that there will be people in this audience, farmers, who are thinking, this is another classic case of a gathering of, NGOs, think tankers, economists, politicians, journalists, all pontificating about food production. when the reality is that we, the people at the sharp end who produce the food, are living through an economic crisis. Our incomes are not going up. If anything, they're going down. They're telling us to do ever more complicated things in terms of food production without giving us the resources to actually deliver. They're impoverishing us and assuming that we'll just keep going. And we can't and we won't. So talk to me about the economics of making this food system transition work.
Well, thank you, Stephen, and thank you very much to the organizer of this very important event for inviting the EIB. I'm proud to represent this organization. I think I heard a lot of negative issues, a lot of concerns. I read recently an article, I don't recall exactly where, but it was saying that narrative of fears can become self-fulfilling prophecies. Well, narrative that are needed are those that empower the people to act. Now, as an organization, I was thinking, like the EIB, I can even give the tools for the people to act. So maybe, if you allow me just one word on the bank, because although it's probably the largest multilateral development bank in the world, it's also little known. And we are lending about 90 billion euros a year, and of these, at least 5 billion euro go to agriculture. So, and we have done this for over half a century. Our vision is to maximize welfare along the entire food value chain. So from primary agriculture, forestry and fisheries, but also to the processing plants and also to infrastructure. This is badly needed for agriculture. And the strategic rationale for a public bank like the EIB, but like many other national promotional bank or IFIs, to intervene is to address market failures and to help the market player to overcome investment barriers. If I can summarize this vision in a number of failures that we see, where we can, and we have, and I'd like to tell you what we've done, intervene. I mean, this 5 would be, first, the fact that global food demand must be met. This is obvious, but we need to give everybody the instrument, particularly the farmers, to achieve that. Second, has been said several times here on this panel and before, agriculture needs to be climate and nature friendly, but also needs to be resilient to climate and also to economic shocks. Another point is that farmers need help to enhance their competitiveness. And last but not least, farming must attract young and new farmers. And no one, especially in rural areas, must be left behind. Now, this seems again talks, but we have instruments, and I said we have provided over 5 billion a year, at least over the last 5 years, to agriculture. 70% of this goes through even individual farmers or smallholders or cooperatives through intermediated lending. So we lend into banks, to your banks in your country, to on-lend with low interest rate for the business of agriculture, for the purchase of the equipment, for the purchase of the inputs, energy, fertilizers, etc. And also, of course, when it comes to young farmer following the objectives of the EU, also the purchase of land in these specific cases. Then we have also, and we want to do more to attract young farmers. We have dedicated loans to that as well. We also are helping sustainable food production also through innovation. We have special instruments like venture debt to help new companies, new technologies to be developed. We just approved the financing of a company that develops, that farms insects to produce feed for animals. But as I said before, the farmer needs to be climate resilient. We need to help to de-risk the activity. Agriculture is the one of the most complex businesses and one of the most uncertain. It depends on weather, and we need to help to ensure and the risk, that type of risk.
If I
Yes.
may just come in, are you saying that the commercial banking system is failing farmers and that you are trying, this is your market failure, that commercial banks are not being, I don't know whether you'd say fair, but they're not interested in farming because it doesn't produce the returns, it's too uncertain, and that's why you need to focus on farming?
Well, I think that would go a bit too far. By no means I'm saying that the market is failing all over the place. What happens is actually we are cooperating strictly with commercial banks to make this thing happen. Probably what the market fails because there's not enough. A lot is being done, but there is not enough. And even if the EIB is a very large entity and can catalyze private sector investors and commercial banks, we're still not enough. But the point is that if we were not there, probably things would happen more slowly, not at the same pace as they would have happened otherwise. But I mean, just to conclude on that, we don't forget also rural infrastructure. Digitalization is absolutely necessary. We need to build better irrigation system, but even roads where it is needed. It was mentioned also the formation. We have just approved for Sub-Saharan Africa alone over 100 million euros. Half of it is going to train farmers in a number of Sub-Saharan African countries. And before it was mentioned by Sawati that there is a need to consider also payment for ecosystem services. If we want to dedicate part of the efforts of the farmers to the regeneration of biodiversity, for instance, well, we need to pay for that. And so we would be happy to work with also with the governmental entities to support the payment for ecosystem services. I mean, I close here. Maybe there are other questions from the audience.
Well, thanks for queuing up, because very soon I want to turn to the audience. But before, we also do need to hear from Maximo. So Maximo, you're chief economist at the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. We've got sort of a big picture discussion going on here. I'd like your FAO perspective on it.
No, thank you very much, and it's very nice to be here with all of you. Let me start with a phrase which I think summarizes the way we are thinking and the way I believe we should move. Good food for all, for today and tomorrow. So good food for all, for today and tomorrow. Why? Because the agricultural sector and the agri-food system, and I am very clear that it's the agri-food system, is not just the food system, because agriculture produces both food and non-food, which is used to feed people. That's the right to food, and that's the definition of food security. So the agri-food system has the obligation to provide the right to food. And that's the bigger objective of what we are trying to achieve. But we can do that today, but if we are not careful, we won't be able to do that tomorrow. And that's where the sustainability part comes, and it's so important. Because if we are not careful on how we produce and how we use our environment, our natural resources, we won't be able even to accomplish that goal today. Even today, we are not able yet to accomplish the goal of providing the right to food to everybody. Now, what is the problem? The problem is that today, if we look at climate financing, a little bit more than 3% is coming to the agri-food systems. And if I focus on smallholders, only a little bit more than 1%. And that is completely inconsistent with the logic of good food for all, for today and tomorrow. Because the sector, there are two sectors that will affect climate: energy and the agri-food systems. The energy sector will resolve itself with the private sector. But the agri-food system is a lot more complex. And it's the sector where we can gain enormous efficiency by investing in transforming this sector. We can gain efficiencies, and we can also use the resources more properly. Now, what is the situation today? If I look at the right good food for all for today, we have 735 million people chronically undernourished today. 2.4 billion people that don't have access to adequate food today. And 3.1 billion people that don't have access to healthy diets today. That's the good part, the good food for all. So that is the challenge that we have today. So we have to be very careful not putting more burden to the producers today, because they won't be able to accomplish this even by 2030 SDG 2s. And if we look at it tomorrow, we know that the agri-food systems creates emissions, greenhouse gas emissions around 30%. We know that it will affect the threatened species. 80% of them are at risk because of the agri-food system. We know it will affect water. 70% of the fresh water withdrawals come from the agri-food system. And we also know that 80% of the pollution in the sea is because of what happens in the land. And that's where we need to increase efficiencies. That's the second part that is so important. So the point is, what are the actions that we need to do? At FAO, we have developed the roadmap to SDG 2 and 1.5 degrees Celsius. That's exactly the goal of it. It's trying to bring all the knowledge that we have today in 10 domains, 2 cross-cutting, policies and data, but 8 sectoral domains on what we have known and how we can improve those efficiencies so that we can achieve this good food for all for today and tomorrow. And that's where we need to change the vision of the agri-food system. We talk a lot today of the bad things coming from agriculture. And it's the opposite. Agriculture provides the right to food. Remember, during COVID-19, during the war in Ukraine, the agri-food system delivered at the end of the line. Yes, prices went up, but they deliver, and you had all of food. And we cannot go against that. We have to support that, but we have to be careful because we need to comply this for tomorrow. And that's the important thing of changing the logic of climate financing. So yes, it's very important to understand that this agri-food system is living under risk and uncertainties, completely. It's one of the most complex sectors. It's also one of the most distorted sectors in the world. That's where the repurposing agenda will come, that was mentioned by Sahawati. But the repurposing agenda will only work for developed countries because of the magnitudes. It won't work for developing countries because the magnitudes are too small. So the repurposing will be a lot more difficult and impact will be a lot lower. So we need to understand that Europe is not isolated in the world. Europe is part of the world. And the climate problem is a global problem. It's not a problem of one country or one region. So if one country or one region does something, it doesn't resolve the problem. We need to coordinate and we need to create some convergence in the world. That's why bringing the transformation of the agri-food system with the climate negotiations is so important today. And what happened in COP28 was one first step. But we need to keep pushing that so that we arrive to a COP29 and COP30 where really action is happening and when we really attract climate financing to this sector because it has a huge goal to accomplish.
Great. Well, thank you very much indeed, Maximo. So, Swati, I just want to bring you back in. I'm just very mindful in the European context right now, you know, that there is a real debate amongst farmers across the European Union about whether the EU's plans to dramatically reduce use of pesticides, use of fertilizers, to set more land aside away from active production, whether these measures, which are all part of the sort of sustainability agenda, are actually endangering today's food production to a point where you're undermining food security and you're certainly contributing to rising food prices. How do you persuade the farmers that they can achieve greater production, avoid the problems I've just indicated, while embracing these sort of sustainability solutions?
Yeah. And I just want to go back to what you said before. I can totally understand the stress that farmers are under. I mean, the margins that farmers get from agriculture is low all over the world, right? And we have been telling them to produce more food. Now we are asking them to be environmental stewards. But the fact is, this climate change and biodiversity's collapse is not something that will impact food production in the future. It's happening now. I mean, in spite of all the agriculture advancements we have made in the last 60 years, there's reports that say that we have actually lost productivity by 21% because of climate change. And if we continue with business as usual, farmers are going to be much more affected than they are right now. And we are already seeing this. All of last year in Europe, there were extreme climate events that really led to impact on food production systems. So yes, I mean, I can understand that farmers, we are feeling the stress about, now we are asking to transition to be environmental stewards, but that should not be the responsibility only of the farmers and farming system. It's our collective responsibility to support the transition because we are all going to be impacted by this. So it's organizations like NGOs, and I would also say, like I completely agree with Maximo, there's not enough financing, climate financing, or biodiversity financing to support this transition for farmers. So we need the financing We need to take more risk through our commercial banks or financial institutions to support farmers in this transition. We need the tools, the science, the technologies to help support them. This is going to be also very much related to a knowledge transfer, helping farmers with extension and other services. We need all of that. It's a whole ecosystem of service to do. But this transition needs to happen right now because business as usual cannot go on. And Maximo mentioned the impact on global food security now, but this impact on global food and nutrition security is going to be even more harder if we don't do the transition now, if we don't invest in it.
This is your opportunity, ladies and gentlemen, to get involved in this debate. I mean, here we've got a panel of internationally important sort of policy makers, policy advisors, representing UN, major financial institution in the European Investment Bank, the OECD. I mean, these are sort of elite figures here who discuss constantly big picture policy making when it comes to, the sustainability agenda and how it impacts food production and agriculture. So you guys now have an opportunity to raise a hand and ask them some challenging and difficult questions. And that's what I want you to do. And you, sir, you've responded to my challenge with a paw in the air very quickly, so congrats to you, and we'll get a microphone to you. Can we get a microphone to the gentleman here near the front? And with all questioners, I would like you just to very briefly introduce yourself and as concisely as possible put your question.
Thank you. My name is Bela Jankovic. I'm a regenerative farmer, and I want to match what Janez said at the beginning about systemic change, because regenerative farming is all about working with nature and not against. I want to ask a question to Nicola. You address market failures, and to my opinion, one of the main market failures is that nature has no value. When you work and you give ecosystem services, you get compensated, and I see that also in practice. It works. We have more water, more biodiversity, more carbon capture, but it never ever appears on the balance sheet, not of my farm, not on nature, on country level. What does the EIB do, or any other institution, to bring nature on the balance sheet as a value? Because if things are for free, they will be used for free, and it has no value.
Yeah.
Should I take it?
I think that was to you, Nicola, but Maximo, you can have a go at it too.
Okay, no, thank you very much for the question, because we strongly believe in supporting the payment for ecosystem services. Now, we are a policy taker, so we're a bank where we can finance, we can help, for example, government agencies to finance those type of payments. But we cannot set up the policies ourselves. This is just a message for policymaker. We would be ready.
You can loudly tell the policymakers that they haven't got things right.
No, I don't say it this way, especially not.
Feel free. You've got a platform right here, right now.
Not the European Commission with which we work and we follow, and whose objective we are trying to implement. So, but I'm not talking about regulatory failure or things like this. I'm just saying we will do our part. We will do our part, and the way we work, the way we analyze the project, and the way we give priority to one project versus another, it always includes the monetization of costs or benefits that are not internalized that are not appearing on your balance sheet. So the price, the cost of nature, or the benefit of nature, is always included in our assessment, in our economic assessment. And wherever we see that a project brings more economic value than the financial value, well, that's where the EIB and where public money in general should go, sometimes also through grants, to help the project happen. The other way around, when the economic rate of return of the project is below the financial ability, well, the project should be taxed, should not receive subsidies or further subsidies. So what can I say is that we are definitely ready, and we have already some experience on this payment for ecosystem services, but it is in our agenda as a priority, and we will definitely be there to support any initiator so that the farmers are properly paid. Once I received the question, and it was a conference on forestry, they said, but sorry, are you saying that if the price of carbon, because we have our shadow price of carbon in 2050 at 800 euro per ton of CO2, are you saying that if a farmer manages properly a forest and then he should be paid 800 euros per ton of CO2 saved? I would say, well, yes, that should be the right payment. But we're not there yet.
Well, carbon pricing in agriculture, as an outsider, a layman with a good degree of ignorance, is there a carbon pricing mechanism within agriculture or not?
Well, there is a carbon pricing mechanism that is currently being studied. We are part of.
Your voice trailed away when you said currently being studied. Like,
well,
you think it's got absolutely no chance of ever becoming reality.
We are working on that with policymakers.
I've never heard a man sound less convinced that it's ever going to happen.
Well, no, I mean. One thing that should be said is that, but luckily, in my department, we are equipped with a number of economists and engineers that are very skilled. Some of them come from FAO and other organizations. Some come from the private sector. They know very well what the issues are. Some of them are farmers themselves. And we have put for the first year now, the president announced at the ECOFIN that one of the priorities of the bank is agriculture and bioeconomy. So whatever has happened so far, well, it's in the past. We are working seriously on that.
I'm trying to read through that to figure out whether a meaningful carbon pricing system is anything like a real prospect in agriculture. It is a prospect. I'm not the one that is able to say whether this will be implemented or not. This is a question for a policymaker. Well, I shouldn't be giving you too hard a time because there are other people involved in this conversation who probably should take more responsibility.
Policymakers.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we've already heard from Ursula von der Leyen, but she was on tape, so we can't ask her anything. Maximo, you had, and then Leanne, if you want to join in. But
only to add, we are a normative agency. And one of the efforts we have been doing the last 2 years is to define the true cost of food. And that is essential because there are many publications that came out, all of them different methodologies, different ways of doing it. So this State of Food and Agriculture of FAO of 2023 produced the first global figure of the true cost of food, which shows that the costs which are hidden, which we are not measuring, especially for developed countries, the most important ones are the health and environmental. For developing countries is socioeconomic and environmental, and then health. But what this means, this is a mirror to what you are saying, no? So if you know what is the real cost of environment damage or the real cost of health damage because of overconsumption of goods which are not healthy, then you can start looking at what will be the change of the improvement of that. And then we can see how we can provide incentives to achieve that. And that's where the repurposing agenda should be looking at. What I should provide incentives so that I can change these hidden costs that are creating a negative effect over nature. No? And in terms of the carbon market, there is a lot of work that is being done on that, and as my colleague said. But remember, it's pretty complex to certify that there is capture of carbon, especially in agriculture. And that requires technologies. There is a lot of exploration on sensors in land to be able to capture that by management of soils. There is the same in terms of forestry, of course. But it's evolving, and the market is starting to grow. So yes, I see a big potential for that market, but we need to bring a lot of technology attached to it to be able to trace it properly.
I want to try and squeeze another question in if there is one, but Leanne, did you want to say something very briefly?
I just wanted to acknowledge that it's a very complicated space, like has been said already. So there is, I think, a lot of energy going into thinking about how do we actually measure these environmental impacts through food systems. The private sector is looking at it. There's tons of innovation, but the challenge is, because of the complexity, it's how do you bring kind of a convergence in a certain direction, which will then allow decision-making to happen around sort of, I wouldn't say consensus, but sort of a general agreement that, that the measurement is consistent and coherent and leading you in kind of the right evidence-based direction.
Yeah, okay. I want to try and squeeze in one more question. If it's somebody who's got a hand up, and there's a hand over there, and there's a hand over there. We probably, the microphone is near you, sir, so you get the chance. Go for it. Just name yourself and give us a quick question.
Thank you. Alexandru Marchiș, I work for ISK Biosciences Europe. Just research and innovation was mentioned many, many times as the solution for the transition. We all know that innovation is incremental and it's little steps. And then if you really want innovation, you should not direct innovation. You should create an enabling environment and let innovation flourish. Then my question to you is, why all recommendations for policies in this context are for restrictions? Why, if innovation is the solution, why if innovation is not enabled?
Right. Our policymakers focus too much on the negativities of this and not enough on sort of encouraging innovation and fresh thinking, fresh approaches. Saswati, what do you think?
I think it's a little complicated, but I mean, and Maximo is a leader in this, but the kind of investments we have made on agriculture research and innovation, especially from public agencies, has actually gone down significantly. And now we are realizing, of course, that we need to invest in innovation for sort of the ecosystem health. But we need to increase investments in innovation, both from public and private sector. But we also need to create economic or enabling conditions for innovations to flourish, which means making sure those innovations reach the farmers, which requires us to also look at delivery models of how this will get to farmers. And we also need to create an enabling environment to create like the business model innovations for these business models to be agile in delivering these innovations. And that also comes back to policy and regulatory frameworks, because sometimes innovations are moving faster than the regulatory environment, which is designed for technology solutions that were developed a while back. And so there sometimes is not much of keeping up pace of the governance systems which we need for the technology innovations, keeping up with the innovations itself that are being developed right now, especially if you look at AIs and other technology innovations that are coming to the market.
Leanne, did you want to just add something on that?
I did, because I think one of the elephants in the room is this issue of what's a coherent policy package. And we can put resources into innovation, we can move energy in that direction, but if we have existing policies that are creating frictions and different kinds of choices on the ground, it's like having your foot on the accelerator while having your foot on the brake. And what you want is to look at the package of policies, not just within agriculture, but across the environment ministries, to see how they come together to move the needle. So, of course, you need to invest in innovation and knowledge and the enabling environment, and you need to ask the question, are there things that are creating disincentives from those?
Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, we're pretty much out of time because I've got to get on to the next thing. But before we let you go, I don't know if you liked it or not, but I characterized you four as part of a sort of global elite of policymakers, advisors, economic thinkers, all focused on how best to facilitate a meaningful, sustainable transition in food production across the world. And it's great to have all four of you here. It's just going back to that sort of where do we go from here basic thought. Are you, compared, I've been doing this event for years, and I've felt over the last year a lot of negativity. Farmers are unhappy, not just in Europe, but across the world. Geopolitics is very unhelpful. There is a great deal of tension between different powers around the world, which does impact the degree to which international collaboration and cooperation can happen. So you four members of this sort of quote-unquote elite, are you feeling optimistic about where we go from here or not? You're going to have to be very brief with me. I'm just going to go down the panel. Start with you.
Start with me. Optimistic. I think there are more conversations about trying to grapple with the hard decisions happening, and also across stakeholder groups and across different ministries within government. We're seeing more effort to try to connect the dots across this complicated system. So I feel...
Nicola?
I'm definitely optimistic, as I said at the beginning of my intervention, but also following what Yannis was saying just at the very beginning. I think we're all looking in the same direction. So something positive can definitely happen.
Great. Maximo?
I think just observing what happened in COVID-19, which many of us have forgotten, and see how the agri-food system reacted and responded, give me a lot of optimism. But I think it's also important to understand that we need convergence. And we need to put a lot of work on trying to create convergence so that we can create this system that works for good food for all for today and tomorrow. I think that change is essential for this optimism to be able to continue in the future. And we need to act. You know, creating innovation is great, but that doesn't mean that we have to push all innovations that happen. It means that we have to be careful, and we have to look at food safety also and keep the balance. We regulate because markets are not operating in perfect competition. And that's why regulation comes up. So we need to be very careful and have the balance. That's what is important now.
And Saswati?
Oh, well, so I spent yesterday meeting some European policymakers, and they made me feel a little bit sad and depressed, but I am overall much more...
Do feel free to name names. Who made you feel sad and depressed?
But as the Nature Conservancy, we work with private sector, we work with policymakers, we are a science-based organization. There's so much of like a global movement happening towards regenerative agriculture, that people trying to find solution, each stakeholder groups. So I'm overall optimistic. I feel like there are these short-term things that happen, but overall we just move up.
Good. All right. Well, panel, you've been terrific. Thank you so much. I think we've left with a feeling that, yes, there are clouds in the sky, but the sun might just pierce them and give us all a feeling of warmth as spring emerges. Let's hope so. Please, ladies and gentlemen, give our panel a very big thank you. Thank you all.